On the Spot with Michelle Makori is brought to you by Prime XBT.
Hello, I'm Michelle Makori. Thank you for joining us. The Federal Reserve will be launching its FedNow Service later in July. This will be the first government-created platform to help banks transfer money in real time. It's similar to what the private sector has created through apps like Venmo and Cash App that send funds almost instantly. And the Fed says that with FedNow, businesses and individuals will be able to send and receive instant payments at any time of day, and recipients will have full access to funds immediately, giving them greater flexibility to manage their money and make time-sensitive payments. So it sounds good, it sounds efficient, but there are those warning that this will essentially lay the groundwork for facilitating a CBDC, or central bank digital currency. Now, the Fed has said that FedNow is not related to a digital currency, that it has made no decision on issuing a CBDC, and that it would only proceed with an authorizing law. So what is a CBDC? Well, generally speaking, a central bank digital currency is the digital form of a country's fiat currency. A CBDC is issued and regulated by a nation's monetary authority or central bank. It is programmable, so can be modified to work or not work in certain transactions, and it allows authorities to monitor every single payment made and received, obliterating financial privacy and anonymity. Now, supporters of CBDCs claim that they will prevent money laundering, prevent and deter criminal activities, and will improve the speed and security of transactions, and can be used to fine-tune monetary policy and allow for financial inclusion. Critics, however, warn that CBDCs are the ultimate tool of control, censorship, and surveillance. And my next guest certainly agrees with the critics. He says that CBDCs were concocted in hell by Satan himself. Rich Checkan is the president and chief operating officer of Asset Strategies International. He's an expert on precious metals and currency markets. Rich, welcome back to Kitco. Good to have you with us.
Oh, it's great to be back. Thanks, Michelle, for having me.
Rich, good to have you with us. And we will certainly elaborate on your very strong opinion about CBDCs. But before we get to that, let's start with FedNow. There's still no specific date when it will exactly be launched, expected later this month. But the Fed did announce that we've got 57 firms certified to use this new instant payment system, 41 banks, 15 service providers on the list, including industry leaders like JP Chase, Bank of New York Mellon, Wells Fargo, big names there. So Rich, help us understand why the Fed is doing this. What is the advantage for the Fed in launching FedNow?
Well, there are several advantages. You know, it all started back last year, March of 2022, with Executive Order 14067 signed by President Biden. And basically, they were talking about cryptocurrencies in general, and they outlined a whole bunch of provisions that they're looking to protect the citizenry and businesses and financial markets through a thorough analysis of cryptocurrencies and their impact on society. And in the end, the very last bullet was to explore U.S. central bank digital currencies. They followed that up after a year's worth of work on this effort, early spring, February, March of this year, April, and they came out and they said, listen, in July, we're going to launch FedNow. And this is a new payment system. It's, get the verbiage right on this thing. It's what we call a real-time gross settlement system, much like FedWire, similar to FedACH. It's just a method of payment. Of course, like you, that got my inbox of emails overflowing with ads every day saying this is the end of the world, this is the start of CBDCs, and it's coming on July 31st. We don't know exactly when it's coming. It's coming sometime in July. You're right. There's a lot of early adopters that are out there with some big names involved.
Okay, but explain why the Fed is doing this. What is the advantage for the Fed and for the banks and the participants behind this? Is this purely an efficiency play? What is the reasoning that the Fed has put forward behind this initiative?
I think that's part of it. Part of it is financial access for the unbanked. From a government standpoint, I think that's, or underbanked. From a government standpoint, I think that's important. Let's face it, if you're a politician and you make the financial sector and financial services available to more people that didn't have it in the past, you probably just garnered some more votes. I think that's important from a government standpoint. From the U.S. standpoint, it's about the global lead in this effort. Let's face it, worldwide, they're exploring, central banks around the world are exploring central bank digital currencies. And where would we be as a leader in financial markets? Where would we be with financial dominance in the global economy if we didn't have a hand in that development? There are efficiencies, no question, about domestic and cross-border payments. The costs drop through the floor, the speed and the timing and the locations where transactions initiate and end can happen in the blink of an eye, 24/7, 365 a year. So that's obviously very positive. That's very positive from a global business standpoint to be able to transact and settle so quickly. And, again, I think it's one step closer to a central bank digital currency. And I think, for the current world's reserve currency, I think it's important to have that lead role. I think I told you off air, I'm a big fan of FedNow. I don't like the fact that I think it's a slippery slope that leads to the evil of CBDCs.
Okay, and we're definitely going to get you to mouth off on why you think CBDCs are so evil, and certainly many agree with you. I certainly have very, very strong concerns and reservations about CBDCs. But before we get to that, I do want to expand on this idea that FedNow is potentially laying the railway down for this, laying the groundwork, if you will, because the Fed has said that FedNow is not related to a digital currency. This is all on their website. They've said that they've made no decision on issuing a CBDC, that would only proceed with an authorizing law. We do know that Fed Chair Jerome Powell told the House Financial Services Committee in March that issuing a CBDC is something that Congress would need to vote on, that it would require congressional approval. And as this launch has neared, the Fed has issued statements saying the FedNow Service is neither a form of currency nor a step toward eliminating any form of payment, including cash. Now, some could say the Fed is protesting a little too much here, but why is this igniting concern that this is laying the railways to a CBDC?
It's the building block on which a CBDC would follow, plain and simple. So, you can't have a central bank digital currency unless you have a blockchain distributed ledger mechanism in order to implement your CBDC down the road. It is the first step. It is the cornerstone, if you will, for a central bank digital currency. And that's why a lot of people are protesting. I will tell you that you're absolutely correct. In this country, in the US, you must have the authority of law to make this change to our currency. There's no question about it. You can't go cashless without it. It does require the input of Congress. It does require the acceptance from the executive branch. All those are elected positions. And that's why a lot of people feel this is several years down the line. This is not tomorrow. It's not July 31st. But the cornerstone is being laid now. And the time to look forward to what that means to us and the implications and whether or not we can block that or structure them in a way that are more suitable for freedom-loving citizens, I think is now. We have to be looking at this now, not later.
Yeah, no, absolutely have to be vigilant and aware of what this could possibly mean. And now, even if FedNow is not part of the overall CBDC master plan, as the Fed contends, but we do know, as you mentioned, that a CBDC is being explored. You mentioned how President Biden in March of 2022 issued that executive order 14067, which facilitates the development of digital assets, including CBDCs. We know that the Treasury has confirmed that it's leading an interagency working group to study a potential US CBDC. And we know that the Federal Reserve Bank of New York launched a CBDC pilot program with 9 major US financial institutions like HSBC, like Citi, to explore the feasibility of a US central bank digital currency. So they're certainly looking at it. It's not clear where we are in terms of development, but being actively explored. So help us understand why you think it's so important to be aware of this now and to start raising major opposition to this concept. Last time we spoke, you basically called a CBDC the spawn of Satan. Why are you so vehemently opposed to a CBDC, Rich?
Well, I do see the positives. I'm not immune to that. I'm not blinded to that. I do know that it can help combat money laundering. And by the way, the positives are the ways they will be sold to us as citizenry. That's how they will get us to adopt it. Combat money laundering, combat tax evasion. On the flip side, help you get your tax refunds quicker. They probably won't talk about collecting your taxes quicker, but they'll talk about getting your tax refunds to you quicker. It'll reinforce American financial leadership. It'll be real-time settlement, like I said, 24/7, 365 on transfers. There will be incredible cost savings. There'll be time savings, and time is money. There'll be inclusion of the or underbanked, and that will get more benefits and entitlements in their hands quicker for those in need. But the negatives for me are just so overwhelming. It's increased government control. There's no two ways about it. They will have complete and utter control over your finances through your CBDC account. It will be increased regulation, and we don't have to get into political affiliations, et cetera. But I just look over time, and I don't see a lot of areas where government regulation has tended to reduce costs or sped up a process in the long run. It could have an impact on the banking sector. They talk about disintermediation, which is a really big word that basically just says we're going to cut out the middleman. If all these people have access to their CBDC accounts and crypto or the CBDC access, they don't need the bank. You get rid of the middleman and go straight. They're looking to at the potential of a massive migration of wealth out of the banks, and where does that leave the banking sector going forward? And the biggest one for me is just the complete loss of individual privacy. There's no financial privacy with the CBDC, and you can just dig through your emails and you'll see all the people talking about the horrors of what could be. And you say to yourself, listen, it's a benevolent government. It's a wonderful country. They're going to do the right things. But a lot of times the best intentions turn into horrible loss of civil liberties, civil rights. And once they're gone, they never come back.
Yeah, Rich, if COVID taught us anything, it's the ability for governments to completely overextend and overreach their authorities at the expense of people's freedom and liberty. And one of the biggest issues, of course, is that this currency is programmable, meaning that governments can decide when it'll work and when it won't work, meaning what transactions will be allowed. Yes. And that is opening up a Pandora's box for governments to decide what you can buy and what you can't buy and in what amounts. And a lot of people have raised the issue that this could be integrated into climate change concerns and issues, if you will, meaning that if you have purchased over 10 plane tickets a month, you have exceeded your carbon allowance output, and your currency will not work to purchase another ticket, or it would, but with a premium to penalize you for your carbon footprint, for example. So,
like a toll lane on the highway to drive faster, it's the same thing, yeah.
Well, with potentially more damaging consequences, you could argue that that has intentions to protect other drivers by having a toll or for having a speed limit. But this is certainly a topic that, as you quite rightly say, once you put it out, you can't take it back. And we do know that regardless of what we're thinking, the Bank of International Settlements, the World Economic Forum, the WEF, are certainly advocating for CBDC. The WEF, very big proponents of this. It was discussed at the annual meeting of the new champions in China last week on June 28th. And we had Cornell University professor 𝗍𝗿𝗄𝗧 speaking about CBDCs. I want to play the soundbite for you and get your thoughts on the other side. Let's watch.
And the one final note I will make is that if you think about the benefits of digital money, there are huge potential gains. It's not just about digital forms of physical currency. You can have programmability. Units of central bank currency with expiry dates. You could have, as I argue in my book, a potentially better and some people might see it, or a darker world where the government decides that units of central bank money can be used to purchase some things, but not other things that it deems less desirable, like, say, ammunition or drugs or pornography or something of the sort. And that is very powerful in terms of the use of a CBDC.
Yeah, Rich, very powerful indeed if the government decides what you can and cannot purchase with your money. Now, granted, you could position it in that it will prevent what we consider to be illegal purchases. But at what point do we lose control and liberty and freedom and give away too much power to the government to decide what we can and cannot buy with this? What are your thoughts on those comments, Rich?
Yeah, there's no question where they're going with this. I mean, the CBDC will be sold as the cure for all our evils. I mean, it's just horrible. He touched on something else there, programmable. You can turn it on, turn it off, and it's not just because of what you're buying. Maybe you're not spending your money fast enough. Maybe the economy that is a consumer economy that thrives on consumer spending, if you're not doing your part, they can take it back. Maybe it's negative interest and they just start leaking money out of your account just because they decided to. There are a lot of negatives. And, I'm a firm believer that if you control the money, you control the people. And there's no doubt in my mind that a lot of central banks around the world are looking at this as a means of control of the populace. There's no question in my mind that China is taking a lead on this. That's of paramount concern to them. I just hope that we're not in that bucket. I do like the fact early on, Michelle, that we are seeing some pushback. Governor DeSantis in Florida has already signed a bill basically outlawing CBDCs in Florida. I believe it's Louisiana, I want to say Alabama, Texas, and North Dakota have similar bills up for signing. I'm glad to see people are starting to be proactive about pushing back. You got to have a real discussion before something like this comes into play. And all of the things that President Biden laid out in that executive order over a year ago need to be fully explored. And I hope it's not just by government personnel. I hope it's by the private sector as well. And they actually listen to the results of those comments.
Right. And you touched on this idea that this would eliminate banks as intermediaries. Hopefully, that's a good thing, and that we may see some pushback from the big banks. Perhaps they could be leaders in lobbying against this if it means that they get taken out of business.
Very possible, but also, you gotta think that the banks are beholden to the Fed, right? So they're keeping them in business as well. So we'll find out who's got the power in that relationship pretty soon, I think.
Right, and as you mentioned, this could be used as a tool of monetary policy, as we heard in that soundbite, that the money can be programmed to expire to encourage consumer spending. As you mentioned, this is a lot more efficient than interest rates, for example. We have too much inflation. Guess what? We suck out a certain percentage out of the economy and we do it equally so everybody loses the same from their, digital wallet. But I mean, how likely do you... Go ahead.
I would say, oh my God, that doesn't sit well with me. But go ahead, finish your thought.
It doesn't sit well with you. And as I said, you've had some very choice metaphors to describe your overall position on CBDCs. What was that line you told me? I think it was a year ago when we were talking about this.
Yeah, the central bank digital currencies were concocted by hell and by Satan himself. There's no question in my mind. I think I see the possibility of the negatives here, and I hope people have more level heads about this. It is not. It's not necessarily evil. I love cryptocurrencies because I love the fact that they're decentralized.
Right.
The problems that we're trying to fight in terms of interest rate manipulations and everything else to get us down to a certain level of inflation. I mean, this is all brought brought about by ourselves. We're not saying no. We have no leaders, in my opinion. Look around the globe, no real leaders like we used to have, where people would say no to spending. They'd pick and choose what we could afford to spend basis the revenues, and they would not overspend, or they would do so very, very in small doses, right? When the need arises and it was a true emergency, and they deal with it afterward. We're not doing that. We just voted here in the States on a debt ceiling, and we pushed it out to 2025. Does anybody know what the new debt ceiling is?
No, we just pushed it out. There is no new debt ceiling.
Exactly.
It was like, we'll just talk about it later.
Exactly. We didn't even set a limit this time around because all we want to do is overspend and continue to fund to buy the votes that get us reelected.
Yeah.
It's sad. And Powell and the team at the Fed, I've been very critical about them. They cannot fix this with interest rate manipulation. They can't do it until Congress becomes fiscally responsible. And there's no sign that that's going to happen. If it was a decentralized central bank digital currency with a limited amount of issuance, I'd all be in favor of that. Because it forced them once again, and I think, by the way, the only way they could do that is to tie it to gold somehow. But this way they would be forced to balance their checkbook like they used to do before we eliminated the link between gold and the dollar.
Well, I like the commodity-backed angle, Rich, but I don't think it can be decentralized and part of the government by definition, because the government is a central authority. So as long as you have a central authority issuing this currency, even if it is backed or pegged to some kind of commodity, it is still very much centralized, and it would still be subject to all of those concerns that we discussed, like programmability, like completely obliterating privacy and anonymity. And the big concern, Rich, is that this may impact people's ability to protest, people's ability to express their thoughts, that this could be a big method of curtailing freedom of expression, freedom of movement. As a similar example, not linked to a CBDC per se, but we saw two examples on the world stage. We saw in Canada how when the truckers were protesting against the vaccine, whether you agree with them or not is another issue, but they did have a right to protest, they were effectively taken off the banking system by the Trudeau administration that issued an emergency law to get them unbanked and prevented people from donating to their cause. And very recently, we've heard from Nigel Farage, who was one of the big proponents of Brexit in the UK, that he has been kicked out of the banking system. He has been rendered bankless because of his political views and thoughts. So mainstream banks are not willing to do business with him. When you have a CBDC, Rich, this is so much easier to enforce, and potentially even more problematically is that people self-censor. People would go, well, I'm too scared to say this or do this because I can't afford to then be taken off the system. I guess that ties into Satan's agenda there, as you call it, Rich.
Yeah, I don't think Satan looks for a lot of opposing viewpoints in hell. And that's government coercion, basically. I forget who said it. I should know this, but, a successful nation is basically one where the government is fearful of its people, not the people being fearful of the government. This puts so much power in the hands of the government. And I'm not talking about armed revolution or anything like that. I'm not evoking violence or anything. What I'm saying is the government is for the people. At least in America, that's the way it was set up. It is not. The people aren't there to serve the government, but the tables are getting flipped. And if you put that kind of power in the hands of politicians, I promise you they're going to abuse it. That's what history tells us. It will happen. And it'd be a sad day, in my personal opinion.
Well, look, as you mentioned, it has faced some opposition in the U.S. from the likes of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who said it would be banned in Florida. Very vocal criticisms from Senator Ted Cruz and from Congressman Tom Emmer. Do you think that this would happen in the U.S.? Do you think that there is political will for this? Or that, as you said, people will just be bamboozled and not told what exactly it is as it gets launched? How likely is it that this does in fact happen in the U.S.?
I think you're going to have a pretty good fight, and it's going to be pretty equal. I really do. Unfortunately, I think the social movement towards censorship and, think or whatever. Everybody's got to think the same thing. And, it's not what this country was founded on. I think people are entitled to their opinions, but they're getting censored, and censorship by the government could be that next step with a CBDC. I don't like the way those things are going right now, and it's part of the reason that nobody can have a conversation and disagree civilly anymore. It used to be you and I can talk, we could completely disagree, and we'd still appreciate and respect each other's opinions, and that's gone from the table these days. I hope it comes back, and maybe this is the issue that brings it back.
I like the positive spin there, Rich. I like that you're optimistic.
A little bit of optimism, right?
But that this unifies people. But, so far, I want to get your thoughts on some of these polls, because so far people are really underestimating the risks of CBDCs. And they seem to be a little too quick to embrace the idea because of the efficiency that it offers, those fast and easy and cheap digital payments. Based on recent polls, we do have opinions differing greatly by country, but we'll focus on Canada and North America, considering we're neighbors. And a poll conducted in Canada by Wealth Rocket showed that out of 1,500 people, nearly 60% were willing to use a CBDC. A quarter declined, citing reservations like loss of privacy and fraud and risk of cyber attacks. The US, different view on the topic. According to the results of a Cato Institute 2023 CBDC national survey, only 16% of Americans support the adoption of a CBDC or digital dollar. 34% said they were strongly against it. But what are your thoughts on this? Why do you think there is a seeming divergence between Canadians and Americans? Is it a question of information? What are your thoughts on this?
For a long time, I've thought that one of the things that make Americans American is their ability to question authority. And again, not saying that in a revolutionary or violent way. It's just I think it's good to question authority, because we're all human and we can all make mistakes. And I think everybody has a hand in coming to the right decision. So I think that's positive. I'm surprised, actually, that it's that strong. I wasn't aware that everybody was so informed on the issue, or it tells me that we're not doing a great job of selling it as a government. I'm not so surprised about the numbers in Canada, maybe a little because of what happened with the truckers. I would expect there'd be a little bit more of a backlash because of that. But my experience with Canadians is they're warm, friendly, open people, and they probably assume the best and not the worst. And probably talk to the numbers that came out.
I share a similar experience with Canadians. Very warm and friendly and kind people, including my team, which is headquartered in Montreal. Of course, I
can vouch for that. I've met them personally. They're wonderful.
Perhaps they need to be a little bit more jaded and cynical, like us here, Rich.
For their own safety.
For their own safety. But look, it also perhaps is just perhaps a matter of people not really fully understanding what is at play here, not really getting the potential sinister consequences of a CBDC. We're not clear on how these polls were presenting a CBDC to the respondents here. What we do know, though, Rich, is that according to the Atlantic Council, whether we like it or not, 130 countries, that's 98% of global GDP, are exploring a CBDC, and that's up from just 35 countries 3 years ago. A new high of 64 countries are in an advanced exploration phase. The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, is already working on a platform for CBDCs to enable transactions between countries. IMF Managing Director 𝗫𝗍 𝗫𝗕𝗧 says it's only a matter of time before CBDCs are rolled out globally and in the US. So is this an inevitability at this point? Even if Americans seem to be opposed to this, and there could be political resistance, would the US have to go along if the rest of the globe does, in fact, go ahead and adopt this?
I think there's an element in the U.S. of a fear of not being part of the dance, if you will, not just not being part of the dance, but not having a leadership role in that dance. I think that's a real concern for our leaders and the status going forward of the world reserve currency. Let's face it, we've benefited for many, many years of the rest of the world buying our debt. I'm sure they want that to continue because it has a big impact on our standard of living. And if it goes away, our standard of living will suffer. And I don't think most Americans understand how badly that can change the way they do things day to day and moment to moment. I think it's inevitability worldwide. It sure seems that way. I saw the same numbers. I was shocked. I mean, in October, November of 2021, there were only about 80 countries, and now there's 130. I want to say there's about 15% or more that are actively running pilot programs right now. So this is not just, whiteboarding something to try and get an idea of where we might go in the future. There's implementation going on and testing. So I do see it happening. I think the U.S. wants to be a part of it. My only hope is that wherever it's implemented, that all the facts are brought out. We're not just sold the bill of goods to buy into something, even though it's dangerous for the future, and we question it. And hopefully hone it to the point where it does some good. I do see the positives, like I said earlier. I'm just a little too scared about the negatives.
A little very scared about the negatives, and rightfully so. As you said, the U.S. wants to be leading the dance, dancing with the devil, perhaps here. And it's important to note that this initiative was launched by the People's Bank of China. This is where this idea originated from, which also has a social credit system to rank its citizens and keep them
already in place, yes,
and keep them in line. So when you combine those two ideas of a social credit system and a central bank digital currency, it certainly does not bode well for freedom and liberty. But because China has been taking the lead, as you said, it may force the United States and other countries to feel like they have to get on board with this program or get left out. And you quite rightfully pointed out the issue of the US, of course, wanting to maintain the dollar as the global reserve currency. And we are seeing challenges to the dollar status around the world starting to accelerate, the accelerating trend of de-dollarization. And we're also seeing countries negotiating their own cross-border CBDC payments now. For example, the Reserve Bank of India has announced that it's considering using a digital rupee for cross-border payments with at least 18 other countries. China, as we discussed, the global leader in the development of CBDCs, has announced a project with the Shanghai Clearinghouse to start digital yuan clearing and settlement services for trading in commodities. So if this develops, what impact do you see these CBDCs and inter-country interoperability having on the US dollar as the reserve currency? Does this potentially accelerate the US's downfall here if that is in fact what's happening to the US dollar?
There's no question about it. We're already seeing a drop in the reserves of U.S. dollars held by central banks in favor of gold, in favor of other currencies. So that trend is already happening. And, I love our country, but I got to tell you, we're bringing this on ourselves. There's two things that we're doing that are driving people away from dollars. Number one, we're mismanaging the dollar. If I'm going to hold a long-term investment in my currency reserves of U.S. dollars, and it's obviously being mismanaged and losing value and becoming worth less over time, I'm going to want less and less of that in my currency reserves. I'm going to put it in its place something that can hold value better. Gold and maybe better managed currencies, although I don't think there's too many of those on the planet either. So that's one thing, is we're mismanaging our currency. Two, we weaponized it. And you'd think, okay, well, that keeps the bad guys out of the monetary system. But you know what? I think it's forcing the good guys out too. Our friends are sitting there saying, I see what they're doing. They cut Russia out of the banking system. And right now I'm on the good side. We're friends. But what if I do something, I misstep, I don't do something right, and America doesn't approve? Am I then on the bad side? Am I going to get cut out of the banking system as well? And they're starting to ask those questions. And the answer is, let me look for an alternative. Again, we're doing this to ourselves. I wish we weren't. And I hope we stop.
Yep. You make some very good points that have certainly been echoed by other guests on this program, that the weaponization of the dollar is leading to what may be its ultimate demise, or at the very least, it losing its majority status as the king of global reserve currencies. And we are seeing a potential bifurcation of the global monetary system. We know that the BRICS are getting ready to launch some kind of currency, potentially a digital currency backed by commodities. We'll see how that plays out. But a lot of challenges to the dollar, and certainly CBDCs and the ability for countries to exchange and operate trades between each other without using the SWIFT system, with using this kind of ledger, is really certainly not going to help the US maintain its dominance there. So, Rich, if you're looking at this as an investor and you see the trend and you're concerned about all of the trends that you mentioned here, what can you possibly do? What can people do about this?
Well, it kind of sounds self-fulfilling here, but, I said this when we talked 2 years ago when that quote came out and they started circulating that silly cartoon.
It was a good cartoon, and I'll tell you why, Rich, because 2 years ago, very few people even knew what a CBDC is.
True.
Still, not many people do. But it's things like that that help create awareness. And at the very least, we like for our viewers to be aware and make informed decisions. And hopefully more people just gain awareness, just understand what the issues are. So perhaps, I should
rephrase. It wasn't a silly cartoon. It was silly because I was in it. But outside of that, it was a good cartoon.
You made an impression with that quote. But go ahead. What can people do then if they're watching these trends and are concerned about them? What is a way for people to potentially protect against this?
Well, I said then, I still think it's true today. One, if central bank digital currencies come into play, then cryptocurrencies, and the keys are Bitcoin, maybe Ethereum, but certainly Bitcoin, are going to become the black market currency, if you will, that's not managed or mismanaged by a government. And I do think that in that cashless society, your new cash becomes gold and silver, the real money, the world's only real money for 5,000 years. So I think that's what happens. I'll take it one step further, though, and I will say that people need to right now start educating themselves about what potentially could come, and raise your voice. Don't sit there as a passive bystander. Don't let it happen around you and then dictate your world in the future. Write to a senator. If you haven't done that in your life, you might want to learn how to do it. You might want to start sending out op-eds in the newspapers. Talk to your friends. Don't just skirt around religion and politics. Have a meaningful conversation with people. I think the time to be silent is over. This could be a good thing if it's done properly. But like I said, I think that it assumes that the private and public sector have a meaningful, open dialogue, and it's geared toward protecting people's rights, freedoms, liberties. If that doesn't happen, we're in trouble.
Right, but even if it does happen in the framework of a dialogue, as you say, once this is implemented, it's a lot easier to change the rules, midway through the game, once we've already unleashed this. But I want to touch on this point where you said you think gold and silver are going to be money as an alternative if this is implemented. And I get we're talking several years down the line, and potentially in a society where we've gone fully digital, where there's no cash, if at all, maybe very limited cash. How would you see gold and silver being used in a practical, pragmatic way in this scenario? Are you seeing people literally exchanging gold coins? How do you see gold really playing a role as an alternative here?
No, I actually do see that as a possibility, back to kind of a barter society with the world's only cash at that point. It's different if you have an alternative for cash. But in this case, cash is stricken from existence.
So wouldn't gold be a black market tool then? I mean, this would clearly not be legally sanctioned, I would think.
Yeah, I guess it would be the handheld version of what you could exchange for goods and services and settle between people. people to people. Bitcoin, like I said, is also a black market option. You can do that, with your smartphones or whatever until they find a way to block that potentially. But the physical transfer of a commodity that is worth something intrinsically valuable between two parties, I don't really know of much else. I mean, let's face it, we've had seashells and all sorts of other things in our historical past, but gold has been the ruler of that realm for as long as we can remember. I don't see it going away, and I still see it having a use if it ever comes to that. I pray to God it doesn't come to that, because that's going to be a messed up world to live in.
Right. Okay. Well, Rich, we do want to get your thoughts on gold in the near term, as well as your macro outlook. We're going to take a quick break, but we will come back and get your thoughts on that. Please keep it right here. And in the meantime, if you are watching this on YouTube, make sure to check out the description in this video. There's a special link for Kitco viewers with a special offer from our sponsors, Prime XBT. So check it out. We're going to take a quick break and be right back. Keep it here.
Begin your path to financial freedom. Gain up to a $7,000 bonus on us. Register and use promo code. Deposit and enjoy a 7% bonus. Available now. Link in the description.